Hey everyone, welcome to Geek Savannah Live. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. I hope your day has been spent without drone swarms flying over you or UFOs or anything else of that nature. And I hope you've had a perfectly civil drone activity day today. That's a terrible joke to start, but there we go. I'm setting the standard high because I'm looking at Graham's shirt and I'm not sure it meets the standards, but we'll have to. He's made an effort at least, which the day he's had, he's been busy. It's a lucky shirt as well, I think. But today we're going to hold one of our live drone Q&A shows. This is one of the shows that I really enjoy, actually. So if you have any questions you would like to ask the panel, please tag at Geeksvana in the chat to make it easier for me to see your question and highlight that. We also have a range of topics which have been raised by viewers over email and DMs in the run-up to the show, so we'll be using those as topic set-offs as well. Our guest today, extremely excited to have Richard back on the channel. Our guest is Richard Ryan of Blackistons, a barrister specialising in the area of drone use and aviation in the UK. Richard has a unique history with drones, I think I could quite simply put it, and as well as looking at his website in terms of the future legal needs you may have, his blog is also well worth a read, which was actually updated today, but there's a bit of history on there as well, and I think you'll find a particularly unique history in drones that gives him such a great perspective on things. There is a link in the description to his website, and we're going to be talking about that in a couple more minutes as well in terms of what he does, etc. But before we bring in the panel, I just want to make it clear that any advice you hear on the show tonight is just opinion and does not constitute any form of legal advice. That really isn't just a sort of get out of jail free card. It is genuinely because every situation is unique. And even if we describe something that actually sounds just like an issue that you're experiencing, you must gain proper legal advice, as even the smallest detail can make the world of difference, especially time. Acting quickly is always a very important thing. And from a personal point of view, if you take anything that I say personally, I cannot recommend Blackistons and Richard more highly in terms of being able to help you should you find yourselves requiring legal services of any kind, and perhaps particularly those that involve the enforcement side of things, shall we say. Yes, there we go. Before I say anything else, let's bring them both in. Hi, Richard, Graham, good to see you.
Good evening.
Richard,
good evening. Great to be
welcome
here.
back. People will recognise you obviously from the fantastic show, one of my favourite shows actually. It's always the detail ones where we get really into the details that I really enjoy. And we had a really great show on PSPO's public space protection orders, which does come up in the questions tonight actually, that I've had so much good feedback on, because your presentation on that, if you haven't seen it, do go back and watch it. I'm going to bring that up again in a minute, but it was such a straightforward way of understanding what is so important in terms of our freedoms to be able to enjoy drone use, particularly in the open category. So yeah, absolutely fantastic. So could you tell us a little bit about what you do for people that, because obviously we see Richard Ryan and you're very generous with your time, both in terms of the industry, the hobby, being on channels like this, etc. But I also want to ensure people know a bit about Blackistons. Am I actually pronouncing that correctly?
Yes, you are. Yeah, Blackistons Chambers. That's right.
Could you tell us a little bit about your chambers and how it works? Because I know it's your direct access, aren't you?
Yeah, that's right, Sean. So I'm a direct access barrister, which means that any layperson can approach me directly, don't have to necessarily go through a solicitor, although they can do. For many centuries here, we had a profession which was a referral profession, so you could only go to a barrister through a solicitor. Right. But that changed some years ago now. And barristers that are direct access have to do a course with the Bar Council so that we can become familiar with clients and then deal directly with them, because there are a set of professional conduct rules that we have to comply with in order to be able to facilitate that. So thank you again for your warning right at the intro there about legal advice. I can't give anybody legal advice unless they're a client. So whatever I do say will apply to me only.
Yes.
And that's the probably the best way of doing it.
Exactly. No, indeed, I do agree.
Can I say same here, because I don't want to get into trouble either. Thank you.
Well, we're already getting complaints
What
about
they
the tame
said.
shirt, actually, Graham. So you're in the naughty corner, I'm afraid. So
I am.
yes.
I don't know. I mean, he's got a great shirt. Maybe he should be out of the naughty corner.
Agreed. There you go. Richard has saved you. So we'll jump into the questions. I've actually seen some really good questions. So we're going to do a question from the emails first, and then we'll come back to one of Simon's questions, or actually maybe even a couple of Simon's questions in the chat. But do get asking, and there's some really good stuff in there actually, because I've got some opinions on some of that stuff as well. You may not be surprised to know. But first of all, I want to come back to council public space protection orders, and just as a very, very quick edit, do go back and watch that show because it will explain what they are more fully. But essentially, it is a way for a local authority or council to be able to restrict certain nuisance activity and be able to take action against it that might have been difficult to do before. Unfortunately, some councils are putting drone use in that as a nuisance, often without much evidence at all. I've butchered the description of PSPO, so please do go back and watch that show. But the question that the viewers put forward is, how can someone challenge either a proposed PSPO or one that's in force, and indeed can they once it's gone through that process, and do they need to be a local resident affected by the PSPO to do so?
Yeah, it is a great question, and I think that the PSPO piece has really grown some legs here. You know, councils are starting to use it for a purpose that it was never designed for initially. You know, this was all about stopping graffiti. It was about stopping antisocial behaviour, or noise and things like that. And the inclusion of drones really has given the councils a tool to use. So that case I was instructed on was the first ever prosecution of using PSPO of a drone pilot, and it was quite an unfortunate one, really, from that perspective, that the councils now feel that they have to use this because it isn't antisocial behaviour, not in my view, anyway. And I think that councils do have to go through a consultation process, Sean, and in that they should notify all stakeholders. And if they haven't, which would include drone pilots now, if they're intending to prosecute drone pilots, if they haven't, then one can argue that the consultation hasn't been completed as thoroughly as it should have been. Excellent. And therefore either has to be reinstated again or is invalid, and they cease with carrying out that consultation. Now, councils, I think, generally speaking, are loath to carry out consultations because of the expense and time that it involves, and they're already cash strapped, right? So I think if they can shoehorn something in, they will do, especially if it's economical and gives them the desired output. But from the consultation, they should really be able to receive representations, able to receive evidence, and they should set up a consultation meeting for which people can come along and voice their concerns. Because what we're trying to say is that the PSPO as a mechanism is unfairly restricting legitimate and lawful drone operations.
Yes, absolutely. Because there are a set of guidelines, aren't there, that they are supposed to follow for local authorities when they're setting up PSPOs. And one of the things that I was shocked about is obviously they are required to have evidence of something being a nuisance in their area. So just because graffiti is a problem in Woking doesn't mean Guildford can automatically add it to their PSPO. They have to show evidence of it. And one of the shocking things that I found on one council that was proposing one, in fact, it didn't go through. I'm trying to remember which one it was. It's still proposed for some reason. But it was basically one of the answers they gave on the Freedom of Information is that members of staff from the council noticed drones being flown in windy conditions in the park, and another noticed a drone being flown aggressively in the park. And that was their basis for deciding that all drone flight on their local council land is a nuisance. And to talk about, in my opinion, misuse of a what is actually a really legitimate power, because it frustrates me as well, because then this is something the police have to help enforce. You know, you're then enforcing bad policy and bad legislation. It's disgraceful, and it's that evidence side of thing that really frustrates me, because of course we know you can't, unless you really do have a problem, unless you have, you know, I don't know, biker gangs of FPV pilots turning up and flying FPV drones at people or something, which has literally never happened, and hard evidence of that. Then, you know, we all know that there won't be evidence of it, which is just very frustrating to see this kind of thing happen.
So presumably the challenge would be, if you were from wherever, I guess, would be what was the initial evidence of the nuisance, and where is the evidence of the consultation? And if they can't provide either of those, then they're on a sticky wicket, aren't they?
Exactly.
Well, they should be. They should be, and this links into the. So I mentioned stakeholder. This links into the residency piece, right? So, what if you're a drone business that operates in the area? Or you're a non-resident or a hobbyist who regularly flies in a particular location. So you're not necessarily a resident from that perspective, but you're a stakeholder.
You're a stakeholder, yeah. You're a user.
Right. And because you're a stakeholder, really, the council should be including you in any consultation so that you can submit your objections or legal challenges with respect to how they want to put a PSPO in place.
Excellent. Yes, and it is something that, again, just because you do get something through the door from the council and it says consultation, and I understand, especially in the drone world and aviation, that consultations don't always feel like they are as you know, or really as much of a consultation as you think they should be. But it is important, especially at PSPOs, because actually, if they do get a number of, if you do rally your local drone flyers to respond, you can often find that something they don't understand as well, they if you bring that understanding to that local authority, you can change things that way as well. So there can be a number of positive ways to deal with that. But again, I really do recommend going to watch that. And I've seen a few people in the chat saying, wow, surely that's insane, says Michaela, surely that's not legal. Go and watch the video on the channel with Richard's full presentation after this show, of course, because it is fantastic in terms of breaking it down. And it's one of those things. Richard was one of the people before the new police powers came in that was sort of waving a flag and getting it mentioned in Parliament. And I sound like a super fan now, don't I? Like I'm, or a stalker. One of the two.
Sean, you're my only one, honestly.
That's not true.
Yeah, that's definitely not true. But yes, Richard is often, if Richard's waving a flag, it tends to be for a very good reason. And ever since that show on PSPOs, the more down that rabbit hole I've gone, the more shocked I've been. So I do recommend that one.
Yeah.
The
fear. Sorry, Sean, just quickly on that. The fear I have with PSPOs really is if councils do see this as a way of restricting legitimate drone businesses from operating in an area, suddenly we're down the road now of having to make applications, of which generally there'll be a fee attached to it. And suddenly you've got, small drone operators who are doing, really good work, roof surveys or, boundary disputes, or looking at chimneys, whatever it may be, right? Even window cleaning now. So many applications for drones. But if a council can find a way of making some extra money out of it and say, well, actually, no, sorry, you can't launch from here. There's a PSPO in place. But if you make an application and pay this fee, well,
all of a sudden it's not a nuisance.
Why can I actually see that happening? Is the shocking thing. It's and you're right, because
that'd be a concern.
Yeah, even that there's Paul from Steel City Drone Pilot is in the chat, who's one of our channel members. I met up with him in Sheffield last weekend and we flew drones, but he is a commercial pilot that operates a lot in the open category with very small, very light FPV drones. and he does the amazing fly-throughs of restaurants and businesses and things, just incredible skill. And of course, often he'll be launching from the roadside on public land, on a council footpath, etc. So it can have a real impact. And if something like that were to happen in an area like Sheffield, where he has his main business, that really would cripple him to have to suddenly pass that level of cost on to clients, and even just the paperwork and everything else, for something that he's doing that he's never had an issue with, of course, and he's never raised a nuisance or an issue and that type of thing in his work. So it's very important. Just hopping over to the chat very quickly to answer a couple of quick questions from there. Stella Mosaic, welcome. Can the EU 5-metre separation low speed mode guidance be applied in the UK as part of Article 16? Very short answer, no. Anything to do with C-class and the C1, C2, C3 benefits, etc., do not apply in the UK at all. It is essentially that C label does not exist, so ignore that completely, and any of the benefits. We do have an Article 16 explainer video on the channel as well, so I'd recommend going across and having a look at that, because at the moment, and this actually leads on to one of the other questions that I was going to ask. At the moment, Article 16 does enjoy a 30-metre bubble of separation, which ironically, for very safe hobbyists, but it's still quite ironic that the hobbyist Article 16 has a better bubble than the standard PDRA 01 flyers at the moment, which is quite incredible. Now, there was a question up here from Simon Stickland, who's one of our amazing channel members, and obviously a true professional drone pilot in every sense of the word, bless him. And I'm saying that as I come up and have tried to see. Here we go. Yes. Now, there is talk, Richard, I'm not sure if you've heard this, that we have the cylinder separation coming round the corner again for PDRA 01, in terms of with the SORA methodology being adopted in the UK and the way that it is felt that changes the risk, that the cylinder is going to come back and we won't have the bubble and overflight anymore. And Simon's asking, really on the sort of campaigning side as well, from a legal point of view, if it does return as rumoured with zero overflight, is there any way ops or businesses can legally challenge this? As it, of course, it would have a massive impact on many PDRA 01 businesses.
Yeah, this is a superb question, and it highlights the complexity of airspace management and what drone pilots have to accomplish in order to be able to get the data that they need, right,
yes,
in a safe way. And what we're talking about here is an unnecessary restriction on the way that drone pilots can fly their platforms. And I think from my perspective, I would certainly be making my views heard to the regulator today and to DFT, highlighting the impact that this will have on the industry. I think that's really the first port of call, because what we want to try and do is influence policy change so that it's better for the drone industry. I mean, going back for when we did Brexit, I was quite a vocal proponent of saying, look, let's cherry pick the best things from EASA,
absolutely,
put it into the UK, including their, the PDRA equivalents, put them into UK, and why not make the UK a competitive drone market on the doorstep of the European continent? And obviously that fell on deaf ears because we've now got so much regulation. I mean, it's great for me as a lawyer because there's just plenty of work out there. But going back to this, I think you've got to be quite hard with respect to your voice. Squeaky wheel gets the oil here. So we need to, as an industry, write to the CAA and the DFT saying what effects this policy change will have, as opposed to what it hasn't done before, which in terms of the benefits that we've got before this came in place would be much easier to highlight now because we've had it in place for so long, right?
Yeah.
And that really is a strong case I think we can deploy here. We list them all out, and we seek other bodies that can help represent drone pilots or other groups of people, whatever it may be, and get them to write in as well. Now that's really the first stage in this. What we then do is request that CAA go through a consultation period again on this, and we ask, and then they go out to the industry and ask them. And I think that's a fair thing to do for the DFT and the CAA to say, actually, we recognise now, after the communication we've had, that this could potentially be complex and difficult. We're going out to the industry to consult with them and realise and understand truly what this means to the drone industry in terms of its impact, detrimental or otherwise.
Absolutely.
And we engage then in the consultation period. And if they still proceed, then we're going to go into the territories of regulation. And then that's where I probably would step in a lot more with respect to the legal skills that I've got to challenge those decisions. And that could be, like I did with UTMA, the Air Traffic Management and Unmanned Aircraft Act. I was liaising with a number of members of the House of Lords and educating them as to what this means to commercial pilots with respect to police powers and how onerous they are to try and exclude commercial pilots. It was literally a technicality that we didn't get that in, as far as I'm aware. And engaging in the legislative piece, but also, and finally, like any regulator, we have a judicial review, and anybody has legal standing for that with respect to holding a public organisation to account on any decision or omission that organisation may have made. Excellent. And there is a process to that, obviously, and I would be the rest of your show talking about it, Sean.
Yes. But trust me, it is actually a thoroughly interesting topic, actually. So we should possibly do something on that in the near future. But Graham, did you have any thoughts on that?
Well,
it would cripple things, wouldn't it? It would be some.
It would absolutely cripple things. It's essentially it's like the A2CFC is unusable in a heavily congested area because of that 50-meter horizontal separation. You cannot keep horizontal separation in a busy area without closing down that area to a moving 100-meter diameter around the drone as it moves around. So essentially, you could have half a town centre closed off. 100-meter diameter takes up a lot of town centre, and then as soon as the drone starts moving, that bit gets bigger. So to do that properly means you won't be using drones above a certain weight in a town centre, and that weight is at the moment sub 500 grams, unless that. And this is where it gets bizarre. Unless that congested area is part of a recreational area near the town centre, which might be busier than the town centre itself, in which case you get your Article 16 and take off and fly over people's heads to your heart's content. So it's a bit insane. But yeah, I do remember a few weeks ago we did a show and somebody was saying we should have some sort of union in place. And I know unions are very difficult to set up, but perhaps we need an effective trade body.
Indeed, effective being the operative word. Should we say?
I think that's a great suggestion.
I think so too. I think I know someone who might be quite good at that. He says putting the camera on one of the panel there, and who might be just about as ideally based to do such a thing. But let's hear lots of cheers in the chat for that one.
Yeah, I'm a very busy man. I'm a very busy man.
Graham was just looking left or right in desperation and looking up for inspiration.
You won't be busy soon, though, will you?
Trouble is, there's mirrors both sides of me.
Very good.
As befits my narcissistic personality.
Yes, very good. Yes, and as Stevie Boy here is saying, unfortunately, you cannot use Article 16 for commercial correct, so that rules that out.
Absolutely.
So it leaves us with sub 250 only. Exactly, it leaves the sort of going into the. It's very frustrating because I really feel like we've had a. From when I started this channel and we were moving in towards the EASA rules and we finally got those explained out to people and everything else like that, I felt like we were slowly coming up a hill in terms of technical ability, technical knowledge and competence within even a basic hobbyist. We had Flyer ID, A2CFC. A2CFC wasn't too expensive, so actually people could progress their skill quite quickly. C-label drones around the corner. It was a very, very exciting time. ever since really around the sea label decision, and really before that, it's just been, not only have the figures of PDRA operators, etc., gone like this,
declining,
despite the fact that drone use is like this, it feels like the level of competence and the level of focus on getting people competent and compliant has fallen away, which is bizarre, because it's
and all of this while the platforms are getting so technically advanced and so capable
and safe.
They don't disappear off anymore, generally speaking. If they do, we know it's user error, don't we?
And it's extremely rare these days.
45-mile-an-hour wind, guys, it's off.
Yes, exactly. Follow the few basics of flying an automated drone effectively, which is what it is. And then unfortunately, and Mark from Aztec was good to see Mark from Aztec Drones was in the chat as well, basically making a statement in terms of things aren't policed correctly and that type of thing in terms of the rules. And unfortunately, you then end up with a lot of people going to the A2C of C with the 50-meter separation, but how's that 50-meter being separated or enforced, or the police even got time to be worrying about that kind of thing, etc. So it does become a bit of a cluster, basically, in my opinion. I won't say the rude part there. In terms of, we've just had this fairly steady decline in terms of competence levels, and it now feels like it's starting to want to drop off a cliff. Ironically, when there's obviously consultations, etc., recently gone through to make the future flight BV loss stuff extremely complicated with 50 hours of training and all the other kind of, so we were coming up, and now it's gone like this, and it's upsetting to me, because I feel like they've lost part of the community that were with them and were coming up with regulation and we're complying and we're excited about sea label drones and everything else like that, and then bang, the feet were taken out from them, unfortunately. But there we go. Next question from the,
I started out when we had the old permit for commercial operations.
Wow.
I had a PFCO and I was flying around then, and with some of the older platforms that we've got, some I don't think they're all in existence now. They're probably considered antiques, but look at how legislation and regulations evolved from then. And back then we had some really good, interesting companies doing some great R&D, really pushing the drone space forward. And I think some of what we've seen now is as a consequence of the regulatory burden in the UK, are those companies moving abroad into Europe.
Yeah, they're dropping away, aren't they? They're clearing off abroad because they can do things.
Yeah.
Because they've got certainty. And that's really what you want from regulation. You want certainty. Because it helps you manage risk. It helps you work out what the costs are going to be to your company. It helps you plan ahead. You get all of these great things from certainty of regulation. And currently, what we've got in the UK, in my humble opinion, is a degree of uncertainty at the moment, which is not helping.
It's not investable, is it? I mean, it's investable to get a PDRA 01, or it has been until now. Possibly not so much now, but it's been. But investable in terms of anything above that, the clever stuff, the bigger stuff, the heavy stuff that can do more. It's not investable because every year you put yourself up for a renewal process which changes every year and seems to change at the whim of whoever appears to be running the department.
Yeah. I mean, going back to my earlier point about cherry picking EASA rules, I've written a blog again today on version 2 of the atypical environment, and this is about flying, BV loss over pylons and places like that. They've been doing that for years in France, absolutely years. And they've got a ton of data, a ton of lessons that they've learned. And what we've seen is a consultation by the CAA, again, now with addition to going out saying we're going to go for an atypical environment, which is another PDRA. So the work's already been done. It's been challenged by SORA, right, in the EU. It's gone through SAIL. It's done all of that. And yet, we're trying to reinvent the wheel, and I just don't understand why.
No, with all of that data to support them, to support their work, it's incredible from a risk exposure point of view to be able to say this other nation under the same rules, etc., has all of this data and rely on that. It reduces their risk exposure massively. It is a crying shame, but yes,
Yeah,
maybe one day we'll see change. Who knows? The next
Sorry, Sean, you were going to take us somewhere
yes,
else.
so the next couple of questions are around police powers, and I expected a few of these actually because,
great.
of course,
Love police
yes,
powers.
indeed, because of course we've had the other side of the coin on the channel from the point of view that with our collaboration with the NPCC, National Police Chiefs Council, which I'm extremely grateful for, because they have come on the channel and they have given their view and their working policies on all of these, on the enforcement of all of these rules. And I respect that when people will come on and say, look, this is how it is as far as we're concerned. And they haven't been the answers that people want to hear a lot of the time. And the comments reflect that, but it is, it is where it is. Of course, always the fundamental point is that they have always got, and they said is at the beginning of all of their videos with us, they really do have better things to be doing, and they're not hiding in the bushes. But when it does come into action, when those police powers, which are very powerful and very particular around drone use, come into effect, trust me, you want someone in your corner. Put that guy. And to me, we can just say the answer to all of these questions is call Richard Ryan, basically. That's the show done. Thank you. Good night. But the first question is, how does someone challenge a poor experience with a police officer? And I think that that's a really nice, the reason I chose that question is I thought it's a really good question because it encompasses a lot of smaller issues that people feel they have about an officer not knowing the rules or being over aggressive or wanting to enforce something the drone fly doesn't think they should be. So actually that whole thing of being able to challenge the poor experience, even through if it's an arrest or anything else like that, how does someone do that as such? Is there a set process in terms of, I'm not happy. I know they've got powers. I know they're trying to do X, Y, and Z, but I'm really not happy with how I've been dealt.
I think, Sean, this depends on whether it's at the time somebody's being confronted with the police or after the confrontation has happened. Okay. Now, if we take at the time, it's always worthwhile talking to the police officer, saying, look, here are my credentials. Here's my flyer ID. Here's my operator ID. You can see it's clearly marked on the platform. I'm complying with the drone code, and we can talk about the drone code a bit later with respect to the advice within it. And I'm doing nothing wrong. Please tell me why you think I am, and let them tell you. And whilst they're doing that, get your phone out and hit the video record button. Right, because you want that evidence.
Excellent. And that's something you're allowed to do, because of course we often get the clips that you see online where somebody will start to record, and often just on their mobile phone, etc. And the response is, you can't do that. That is something that as a member of the public being approached by police, I'm allowed to do.
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, they can strenuously object to it. But if it was me, I would be getting my phone out and saying, well, look, you're a public servant. We're in a public space. Just like any CCTV, I'm recording this for my own safety and protection.
Excellent.
And make that clear. And on that basis, you record whatever interaction you're having with the police. I won't necessarily say it's a confrontation, because it isn't always. No. Sometimes police officers generally come up to you and say, "Excuse me, just let me know what you're doing." Somebody's, I haven't had a confrontation with the police before, but I've had somebody moaning about me when I was doing some filming work about privacy, coming up to me while I'm flying, saying, "Are you looking in my back window?"
The classic.
That kind of thing. Obviously, I wasn't.
No, indeed.
So you're going to get a range of different interactions, and some of it may be legitimate because somebody has made a complaint to a police officer locally or whatever it may be. But I think you should always do that. There were previously, I have had on occasion some clients that had regular interactions with the police because of the way that they were utilizing their drones, filming sporting events, for example, where I went through their operational authorization and I gave them a letter to say that if the police have any issues, to contact me. And they could hand that letter to the police officer. And suddenly now it's a different discussion you're having, because that person may or may not have legal representation. All we're doing is saying, just speak to somebody who is a lawyer, right? And you can have that conversation then. So that can happen at the time, and that's a mechanism that I've employed previously. And then post any altercation, well, you can always formally write a complaint to the professional standards department of that particular constabulary, or you go one step further and go to the independent office for police conduct, and write a formal complaint there, of which, if somebody's struggling with that and they have got a genuine case now, that could be something I could discuss with them on doing, because when it comes to that sort of thing, you really do need to highlight key evidential points: where, when, what, and how, right? And document all of that, and make sure you get the police officer's badge number and the name, which hopefully will be also on your video, and you've recorded that on your video too, because they are obliged to give you that.
Excellent.
And so from that experience, and look, police officers, in their defense, I'm sure they are trying to do the best thing, but they might not always be as knowledgeable about drone law as they could be. And this was a point that I raised with the House of Lords when we came in with the UTMA Act. At the time, I said, you're asking police officers in different constabularies around the country to go and, with these great police powers, to seize drones, to arrest drone pilots, search vehicles with a warrant, whatever it may be, and not have an idea on the fact that they've actually been compliant as drone pilots, and they've got a qualification, whether it was a PFCO back then or an A2 CFC, whatever it may be. And so, they can get overzealous at times, and that's what one has to be guarded against, I think. And that's where recording your stuff at the time really does help.
Brilliant advice, absolutely. And it is one of those things that in my view, and this is just my personal opinion on this situation, I do feel like the new legislation kind of threw a problem at the police from the point of view that it said, right, now you've got to enforce these, now you've got the powers, go away and solve these problems that may or may not exist. And suddenly the police, they're policing, and they're hopefully doing their job. And it's only now really that I'm seeing a lot of very good work in terms of the MPCC drones having a seat at the police college and that type of thing. And a lot more work is going into training existing and previous new police officers as they're coming through the college, and Geeks One ourselves are involved in some of that through the SAG IAG work. So it is changing, but as you say, that doesn't help the chap on the side of the road who has the officer that doesn't know something and perhaps has a human reaction and gets a bit upset that they either they don't know something or that they're upset with because there is that thing with drones that people feel like it's something very substantial suddenly in front of them. Oh my God, you're flying a drone, and they can get very, the hysteria over the New Jersey drone flights and the airbase flights. It shows just how people can react to a flying camera, or a.
Dare we mention Gatwick?
Yeah, crikey. Yeah. And yes, it's so it is. It's, to me, I kind of understand both the awkwardness of both sides of that issue, and of what can then become a confrontation. But yes, that's fantastic. And I was right. The first thing you should do is call Richard Ryan. On both scenarios. Just stand there, please, officer. I'm just going to call Richard. Or just hand Richard's card. And then the next question on police powers was actually what to do if you're arrested and detained, and they're seizing your drone gear and that type of thing, and you are on that side of the enforcement cycle, because trust me, when what I call the snowball effect hits you, and suddenly something's been spotted, and then the snowball of they start spotting other issues and potential alleged breaches of legislation, it all snowballs to suddenly you're arrested, your gear's being seized, and you are under the weight of some significant police powers. It sounds an obvious question, but I have seen so many times people not use the one weapon that they have, which is, I won't say silence, but actually time, in terms of getting representation and getting advice as early as humanly possible in any situation where you're arrested, etc., but particularly within the drone space, in my opinion. It is so important, isn't it? As someone, of course, who would be the man I would call, I would presume you'd like to be called, as soon as I arrive back at the station, if not sooner, and certainly not when I've been bailed, and I update you on the interview.
They're not bailing you, Hickey. They're not bailing you. Not with your
once
record.
They get me, they'll take me down.
They might do, Graham, but it's a couple of £1 million to get him out.
Can you imagine me? Can you imagine that GoFundMe? Sean's bail. Yes. Would people pay to keep me in, though? That's the question. But that time is so important, isn't it? It's one of the things. When I saw this question, I thought, well, that's obvious. You call a lawyer, but actually, it isn't obvious to everybody, and they're not sure when to do that. And as soon as possible is so important, isn't it? And actually, with your PSPO case, time almost became a critical factor there in terms of delay in response.
Yeah, it did, Sean. It's if you were in this situation, it's a real terrible situation to be in, right? Because you've been flying a drone, as far as you're concerned, legally and in compliance with the law, and suddenly you're now being arrested and put in handcuffs. Your drone kit has been taken, and you're off down to the police station. If it was me in such a situation, once I'd been given a caution, because they always have to give you a caution, right? The right to remain silent, blah, 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 blah. I would stay silent, be compliant with their instructions, and remain calm, and go along with it until you get a solicitor involved. Okay. Now, I could always turn up at a police station, but I never really do that. But I've got a really good criminal solicitor friend who does that sort of work. So if you were in a real sticky situation, you by all means give me a call, but I'll be passing it on to somebody else who's more well versed at police station attack.
Why do I feel like some kind of foreshadowing here? But yes.
But I think what's really important here is to know the process, right? So you get booked in, and they'll charge you with whatever, or they'll say subject to an investigation, we're now confiscating your kit. It's really important that you do engage legal advice early on here. From my perspective, I would want the investigation to be concluded as soon as possible and my drone kit back, because if I'm in business, for the time that my drone kit is in the police station, I'm not earning any money. And what if I've got a drone job booked the next morning that I now can't attend? I've now got to inform my customer and say, really sorry, but I can't attend tomorrow for other reasons. I wouldn't really want to declare to my customer that
I'm in choky.
Yeah, exactly. You wouldn't really want that. And so you'd press hard to get your kit back. Now, what was really interesting in the PSPO case, Sean, was because the drone pilot had pleaded guilty to a certain aspect of it, and the magistrates found him guilty because of that. The council went straight for a forfeiture order of all of his drone kit.
That's right. I remember that now.
And that was, pretty substantial. We're talking M300s and the like, so quite a lot of kit and quite a lot of value, which would have taken him out of business.
Life-changing.
And I managed to persuade the magistrates to say, look, this is actually an onerous aspect of a PSPO. And they went with me on that, which was great. So he never had to forfeit his kit. because they wanted to forfeit it and destroy it.
Which is taking somebody's trade away.
Yeah,
it's ludicrous,
totally,
isn't it?
Totally, yeah. For what really was, in my view, unnecessary, but also could have potentially, if the drone pilot had taken advice early,
yeah,
would not have been in that situation.
It's so important, right? in any legal situation, really, but particularly surrounding criminal prosecutions and court action and pleas and that type of thing. It's so important because there is obviously internationally there is this pressure, which I feel is somewhat unfair to go guilty early for reductions and to be seen as complying with the system and that type of thing. I think that needs, personally, I think that needs addressing at some point in the future. But I just cannot emphasize enough how important it is to get that advice as early as you possibly can. It can change your life, frankly. I've personally been in legal situations where good early advice has changed situations for my family significantly, in terms of how they may have actually ended up. Sorry, my phone has started to ring there. Oh, it's the police. No, it's a joke. Sorry. So it really is an important one, for sure.
And I think, just to highlight a key point, it's not just about making sure you're comfortable by getting advice early. It's because there are usually key timeframes by which a response or an action has to happen within the process of the judicial system.
Yes. Excellent.
So you've got to be really aware of that. That's the other reason why there's no point in sitting on something for a good few weeks, because you may have missed a window there by which you had to reply or put a response in or deal with a key aspect of evidence or whatever it may be. So if it was me, I would be very keen on wanting to understand, well, what's the next time-bound instruction that I have to comply with. I'd really want to understand that, in order to be able to make sure that I afforded myself the best possible defense I could.
Absolutely, yes, indeed. It is just so important. And I remember one of the stress points of your PSPO case that really resonated with me on a personal level in terms of feeling that person's stress was that, and how that guilty plea and everything else and the timing of everything really impacted things. As you say, from a point of view of a forfeiture order, and that just would have crippled that chap's business, and of course the impact on life and family and everything else. It really totally brought it home to me. So when I saw that question, I thought it was an important one. Here's a question that I know Graham will love because he loves the council bylaw questions. Is he smiling? Yes, he is. John Burns.
I'll go and get a drink.
That's it. John Burns, one of our regular viewers, and it's an interesting one actually because it's a question I have based on this statement from John, which is worth sense checking. So John says, Sean, my local council says they have no policies or bylaws re flying of drones from council owned operated land, yet their parks department say the flying of drones is not allowed. And it continues, no park bylaws either. Where do I stand if challenged on the park? Now, one of the first things I would say is, obviously the drone code says, check the park for signs and that type of thing. But personally, I wouldn't dig too deep in terms of trying to find things because flying in the open category, this is because it isn't necessarily that easy to do. But I wouldn't go into too many reams of research on it. It's also very difficult to get permission for, and the way I try and describe it is write to your local council, email them, tell them you have 2 dogs and you would like to walk them across the park every day and back. Could they give you written permission to do that, please? And of course, we all know we can go and walk our dog and we wouldn't think twice about going and walking our dog in a public park. But actually, the council would get that. The legal team would say, oh, hang on, what kind of dog is it? And does that dog need a muzzle? Does it? And actually getting an organisation to give you permission to do something that you have every right to do can sometimes be very difficult. So councils will often react with a policy, and they'll say, okay, no drones, because it kind of protects them insurance legally and that type of thing, because they said, well, that's our policy. So we haven't said yes, drones, but safely, and then someone flies an FPV drone into someone or something. That's kind of the take I've always taken on that. Would you agree with that in a sense check type of scenario, Richard? Or is that too simple?
No, I think in general terms, Sean, I would agree with that. I was going to say Graham then, because I know he's an advocate of bylaws, as you just said.
Brilliant.
But I would, I'd always be cautious with respect to seeing any signs, and just showing that you're generally seeking to comply with what they've said. Well, why
Physical
are we not
signs
allowed?
in the park? Absolutely, I completely agree with you.
Why is the park department saying no drones can fly? What's the issue here? And let's remember that the key element of airspace is equity to all users. So I'm flying in the airspace, and this is where we continuously find this tension between ground law and air law. And I think it's becoming so much more relevant now. I've been involved in some interesting work over the last 12 months where licenses have been procured from ground owners to fly. We've seen a case of trespass where a drone with a camera now constitutes trespass potentially.
Yes, absolutely.
And this tension between the two is becoming increasingly relevant. Local councils won't necessarily understand that or know of it. So you're dealing with a park warden here, and sometimes just taking 5 minutes to say, look, this is a drone. This is what it does. This is the camera. Look, let me show you how it flies and how safe it is.
Yes.
And suddenly you've educated somebody in the parks department who's now an advocate of drones within the local council that can help your cause. So just putting another spin on it. Really,
I agree with that. And we always, in all of our videos, we always talk about trying to reach out and speak to people and be an advocate for the hobby and the industry, certainly. And but of course, as per some of our police informant videos as well, it's important to point out that when we've raised that question with them, they've clearly stated that they're not there to enforce council policy, and it's a civil matter until it becomes like an obstructive trespass and that kind of thing. Personally, I have had this situation on a few occasions. I've done exactly as Richard's described in terms of attempting to talk to them. They've never been an actual confrontation because they're just doing their job of saying, I am told you can't do that here. Can you please stop? I explain why I feel I can and give them my YouTube channel, etc., and that type of thing, and try and trying to say, don't you know who I am type of, no, I don't, I joke, but I do give them the YouTube channel. But then
I don't know who you are, so I don't know how that's
no,
going
that's
to
right. Yeah. But then actually, could you imagine that though? Don't you know who I am? No, literally 99.9999999% of the country don't, Sean. So there you go. And the others just go, aren't you that bloke? And then actually, I personally do comply and I move on because I don't want that person. This is just a personal preference because I don't want that individual to have a particularly negative view of drone use, etc., especially if they've been receptive to my initial chat. I'll still come back there and fly another time, but that's my own personal thing that I'm doing to probably build up a obstructive trespass or something of that nature. But yes,
an awful lot of the bylaws, and you can tell the older ones mainly because they've just been photocopied and they're in old Times Old Roman script or whatever, or they've been written with a quill and just photographed and shoved onto their website. And they'll talk about model aircraft using combustible fuels and that sort of thing. And I suspect this goes back to a period when the hobby of model aircrafting was developing, and people were probably setting up little runways down the park across the picnic area. And so you can see how that could become a nuisance in some areas where there's lots of hobbyists trying to set up essentially what would probably would have become a club down the local field.
That's right.
And of course, now it's very different because these things can take off from your hand, and I know that you're still on the ground and all the rest of it. But in terms of a nuisance to the public, it's a very different thing.
Yes.
Although they're telling us, it's got a camera.
Really good point.
Everybody in the park's got a camera.
Yes. No, exactly. But it is
You're
it's
right,
that thing
Graham.
of it's a flying drone. People, it triggers people, and that's
they
the
are
big.
they are triggering,
As
aren't
per
they?
one of our shows earlier in the year, Graham, where we talked to people about this is the biggest problem is the PR of drones. And as drones become out of our hands in terms of the hobby and industry and into the hands of future flight and delivery drones and all that kind of thing, which people I think aren't actually going to like very much on the whole initially. We need to try and get ahead of that in the PR game somehow, and almost separate our drone use from that to say, hey, but we're kind of the old guys in the shed tinkering with the model aircraft type of drone users. We're not those confounded delivery drones that then try and sell you roof repairs because they spotted a hole in your roof when they were dropping off the pop socks to you. So yes,
there was an element that I looked into, Graham, on one of those bylaws, and it was for a well-known organisation that we know and love that protects historic parks and buildings in England. And I had a look at their bylaw, and the old-fashioned language in it was something around mechanically propelled vehicles.
Oh yes, conveyances.
Yes, that's right. And could one argue that a drone is one? Well, I think you'd find it very difficult to say that you could.
Very difficult, yeah.
Because a mechanical propelled vehicle back then was anything that was on the ground moving forward or backwards or wherever the case may be, not something moving in the air.
Exactly.
And so to try and restrict airspace on those grounds, I think was a real stretch.
Now, there are a couple of questions that are the most important for me because we are cracking on with time and I don't want to keep Richard too long on this. So I'm going to go for the drone code and separation distance one. All of the amazing questions that you're asking in the chat, including this statement from Gary from Drone and Sundry. Good to see you, Gary. We've got like a crossover going on here with Richard on our panel, Gary in the chat, because I'm normally in his chat.
Hi, Gary.
And it's sort of, we've got like a weird crossover going on there. We need Gary on the channel at some point, actually. I don't think that's ever actually been a thing. And he can relax and not worry about the power going and the whole thing going down for once. But yes, all of your questions, the wonderful questions in the chat, I will store those up for the next Q&A that myself and Graham do, and then the next one that Richard comes to as well, if they are legal ones. So we will get you answers to those, and I will answer the rest of these questions as well. But it's fantastic to see so many people coming along this evening. Thank you. Do hit the like button. I am doing the YouTuber thing, and if you're new, hit the subscribe button as well, because it makes Graham smile and helps pay for his shirts, his shirt addiction. But one of the questions I want to, because it's becoming one of my fascinations, is the drone code. And I want to caveat that I believe in a good drone code. I think having a drone code is a great idea in terms of it's a wonderful standard in terms of, especially for beginners, they've got a very simple website they can go to and find out where and how they can fly their drone. Now, if it was correct all of the time, and if we hadn't had to make corrections to it this year, it would have been even better. I can see Graham smiling. But it is, of course, the drone code is a code. It is a guidance from the CAA. So parts of it, fairly substantial parts of it, in fact, are not legislation. How is the drone code therefore applied in something like in court to support a prosecution and that type of thing? So I would assume a judge would refer to the drone code as a general guidance from the CAA to say this is how to operate a drone safely. But as it's not legislation, what kind of impact do you believe it should have and does have in a court of law?
Yeah, I think the drone code is a useful document, but like you say, Sean, it's definitely not legislation, right? It's guidance use only. And a judge would be referred to the drone code. And the way that, if I was a prosecutor, the way that I would refer a judge to the drone code because a drone pilot is being prosecuted is to demonstrate that the pilot knew about the drone code, which they should do, because I think at one stage a drone code was being issued with every drone being sold in the UK, wasn't it?
Yes, and indeed
that was the theory.
Yes,
wasn't it?
under
the classes.
EASA, there would have been a leaflet in every. As I say, we were moving towards this system that had so many good little safeguards in it, that because so many people say, can't we just give people something? But anyway, in actual fact, with our new partnership with DJI, everyone that buys a drone with DJI UK very soon will actually get a Geeksvana leaflet and a link to our whole drone rules video. So we're kind of halfway there. But another plug, but there we go. I'm being very YouTubery, sorry. Carry on.
That's all right. That sounds very opportunistic.
Yes.
I'm very unlikely.
I know, right?
But great. No, I think that's great work. So going back to the underlying question. So what I would do if I was a prosecutor, I'd be saying to the drone pilot, look, you know the drone code. Yes, I do. You know what's within the drone code. Yes, I do. And the drone code is there to demonstrate that you're competent, but also responsible, aren't you? Yes, I am. So suddenly I've established a baseline of competence for the judge's view of what that drone pilot should be complying with. And they should know that and then adhere to it, right? Then what I would do, depending on what probably it's a prosecution under Article 241, right? Reckless endangerment or something like that, I would imagine. I would then be looking to demonstrate why those actions are reckless, negligent, or there's been a disregard for safety. 241, as we know, and you've said it before, Sean and Graham, that's a catch-all, and it really is. So suddenly I've now got the bar of competence. I've got why they've been negligent, and there's probably a video somewhere that they filmed
and posted. Yes,
and posted why they've been negligent, and then that supports an argument by the prosecution that those practices that they should have been aware of are safe practices, but they've deviated from that code in order to conduct unsafe or illegal activity. So what it's being used as is a benchmark of influence to demonstrate, in the absence of anything else, what is regularly known in the industry.
That's the key point, in the absence of anything else. If you were my defense lawyer, then you would presumably say, Mr. Degg, you reprobate, are you aware of the AMC and the details of the AMC around this aspect of flight? Because we know there are clear contradictions between the drone code and the AMC allows you to, let's say, get away with more in certain circumstances, and presumably then you could turn that argument around and say, yeah, drone code, that's my cartoon version, that's for the children, that's the kindergarten, and therefore I'm aware of this higher level document which presumably has some sort of precedent within the CAA and is closer to law.
Absolutely.
And so my defense is, sorry, I wasn't flying to that one. No, I was flying to the AMC. And if you look within the AMC, what I was doing is allowed.
Yeah, it's a real interesting counter argument, Graham, which you'd look to deploy right in your defence. And the AMC is directly linked to regulation under the EU retained legislation. So, as acceptable means of compliance, as we know, it's all split down as to what is acceptable means, as you guys know, under the relevant categories of class. And you'd look to point out in your defence as to why you did comply with those regulations, as opposed to, what are written in fairly broad terms, the drone code, right? It is a drone code. I mean, the specifics of the drone code are clearly height and VLOS, right? And when you get beyond that, what actually is happening. But what's really key here in any prosecution is the test for prosecution, and it's beyond reasonable doubt. So if we took an Article 241 example, reckless endangerment, can the prosecution prove beyond a reasonable doubt that I'm guilty of that offence, right? Because I've not complied with the drone code. I mean, that's really the question here.
Yeah.
Okay. And what we're saying is, well, actually, the drone code, albeit is relevant for most people, but I have not committed any crime under 241 because I've adopted these particular aspects under the AMC, or in fact, there's some confusion between the two.
Oh, there is some confusion between the two.
And it wasn't clear to me.
2 days in a Facebook Facebook thread on this, and we made a program. We made a show.
We did. We made an entire show about it. Because indeed, it was incredible. And actually, one of the questions I'm not going to ask tonight, because I think it may even become a campaign video of its own, frankly, and it was one of my own questions, is regulatory confusion as a defence, from the point of view that I feel personally there is so much confusion now about the regulation surrounding drones. What's advice?
It's not robust.
It's
not a robust legal defence, obviously. Yes. And you've got to be really clear on that. And that's why we have case law. That's why cases go to court. So if there is any discrepancy or misunderstanding or ambiguity around how to apply the law, that's why we go to court. We're a common law jurisdiction, and case law helps us work that out.
Indeed. Thank you. Now, a couple of people in the chat have had more questions regarding the council side of things. The PSPO video is a really good one for that, but also there is also a council guidance video, the council and your drone on this channel that I put a lot of work and research into. And in fact, the last time the police were on here, they got that question, they said, go watch that video, basically, in terms of what councils can and can't do. So if you do have those questions, there is a specific video for that, so that we don't ask the same questions each time we're on the show and get Graham angry. I'm picking on you tonight, Graham, sorry. First it's your shirts, and now it's your off-air opinions that I'm bringing on air because I'm not very professional. So again, as I said, we will put the rest of these questions in the next one. There's probably actually, with some of your questions, there's even entire videos that we can record with Richard in the future in terms of giving some general guidance and advice. But hopefully you've seen, and I'm not one for shying away from adverts of things and backing something that I believe in. And to me, this is a really great advert this evening for Blackiston's and the Blackiston's Chambers, which is linked in the description if you do need legal advice as a corporation, as an individual. To say this man has a wide area of expertise in this narrow field is an understatement, and I would challenge you to find someone that has the unique background that he does that allows him to have that expertise. But really, and he doesn't bang his own drum nearly enough, frankly, when he appears on these shows. So it's there for all time now on the channel. Please do, if you need help and advice, go along and have a chat with him. But Richard, thank you so much for being with us this evening, and please come again next year, because it's only in a couple of weeks.
Thanks very much for your kind words, Sean. Great to be on here with both you and Graham.
It's no problem. Yes, and I'm always happy when someone keeps Graham quiet as well. So it's because it means he's listening, and it means the information is he says feverishly backpedaling.
I'm not listening.
Okay, and as it has been more quiet this evening, shall we give Graham the final word?
Yeah, we've been talking about sort of flying in parks and public spaces. So I think the final word is this one. Please keep off the grass.
Thanks, everyone. Sean out.